Daystar was unable to touch Joni Lamb's face for many years. Investigative journalist Julie Royce has so far revealed a terrifying secret that is upending the Christian media establishment. Quiet boardrooms, secret money, and betrayal that nobody anticipated. What Joni believed would remain concealed is now abruptly revealed. Furthermore, the truth is far more terrifying than anyone anticipated. After hearing this, prepare to see Daystar in a completely different light. One of the largest Christian networks in the U.S. was not intentionally destroyed by Julie Royce, but she was unable to leave after learning about the behind-the-scenes activities at Daystar. Christians had revered Daystar for ages. Millions of people worldwide received messages of hope, prayer, and faith. Speaking on behalf of the network, Joni Lamb was regarded as powerful, attractive, and incredibly devoted, particularly following the passing of her husband, Marcus Lamb. She was viewed by many as a symbol of strength. However, when renowned investigative journalist Julie Roy began to pose challenging questions and expose corruption in religious organizations, things began to shift. Julie was already acquainted with the Lamb family. She worked closely with Marcus and Joni from 2007 to 2011, which allowed her to get a thorough look into Daystar's internal operations. She was more than just a local reporter. She had already entered. She realized something wasn't right when rumors began to circulate that the network was experiencing financial difficulties. Before she discovered Daystar, a lot of people had misconceptions about it. Little things were the first. Allegations of unnecessary expenditures and the usage of money for purposes unrelated to the ministry's purpose. However, the parts soon began to form a much more ominous image. Julie got to work. She examined bank data, tax filings, and public documents. She spoke with former co-workers. While some were afraid but frantically wanted to be heard, others were prepared to speak. What they discovered was disturbing. Rumors that the funds were being utilized for lavish vacations, upscale shopping, and even political involvement threatened Daystar's nonprofit status. The acquisition of a private aircraft was one of the most concerning red flags. Despite Daystar's claims that it was necessary for worldwide missionary activity, Julie discovered that the funding for it came directly from contributions. These items were not purchased with additional funds. They received funding from viewers, ordinary citizens who donated money with the belief that it would be used to aid others rather than purchase aircraft. After our journey, we returned home. Daystar purchased Yes for $100,000 in July. I was going to ask you that question. In addition, inquiries concerning that are being made online. Therefore, the answer is no. We paid for our trip entirely out of Daystar funds. We covered the cost of our honeymoon. All right. Another deception that has been proven to be untrue is that one. However, there were other concerns besides the jet. Julie saw that people were making financial decisions that appeared to be more motivated by power and image than by service. She discovered connections to political acts, inquired about the network's handling of its tax-exempt status, and observed discrepancies in the reporting of donations. It didn't seem to be the message Daystar claimed to convey. The worst theory, that certain ministry leaders were living in luxury while lecturing the public about aggressive measures to acquire money, was validated by former employees. A woman who answered the phone during a telethon described a really depressing incident. She told Julie about an elderly caller who was sobbing and claiming she had to give up her last $1,000 because she owed money. God would return 10 times the money, according to a television preacher. According to the employee, things changed right then and there. The feeling of hope was vanished. People seemed to be being taken advantage of. Julie continued, and her reports continued to increase. She told more than just the facts. She managed to survive in this way. A setting where Daystar's executives were less spiritual mentors and more business executives. She realized that this wasn't a single error when she pieced everything together. It was a methodical, covert approach to business that was designed to go unnoticed. Whatever the case, Julie saw it. She did not merely bring it to light. She unleashed it on the world. The outcome was immediate. Fans of Daystar who had been around for a while were taken aback. Many people began returning their gifts. Each church followed its own path. The responses to their inquiries infuriated the public. Julie did more than simply investigate. The silence was broken by her. She demonstrated the importance of responsibility even in Christian media, which places a high weight on faith. And removing responsibilities doesn't hurt those at the top. They are the ones who donate because they have faith, hope, and trust. Julie's work received negative comments. According to some, she was disparaging the church. Some claim it was an attempt to propagate false information. Julie, however, never gave up. She appeared to be paying attention. What is true? Daystar wasn't the only location where she was taken aback by her discovery. Many people were prompted to reflect by it. This did not sit well with ministries, because it sparked a long overdue discussion about honesty in faith-based television. This incident was extremely significant. When the curtain is eventually drawn, you cannot pretend that you are blind to what is happening. Every 6 months, they have their telethon there. Hundreds of employees spend the entire day answering phones in a room filled with booths and phones, which I believe is now known as Heart for the World. During the telethon, the Department of Prayer was also in charge of collecting donations over the phone. However, there were occasions when the volume of calls was so high that all employees had to put their phones on wait. Thus, this was one of those unique occasions. Many folks were phoning. My phone immediately rang. This nice little old lady tells me how much debt she has while crying. As someone on the show stated that if you give $1,000 today, God will repay $10,000. She intends to give Daystar the little money she has left on her credit card, even though she doesn't have any cash on hand. I can't even describe how terrible I felt when I ran the card and saw the number. There was something seriously wrong. It all began with a private jet, not just any plane, and it was the first time I paused and asked myself, do I want to be a part of this? Is this the kingdom of God? Typically, a private jet is associated with comfort, riches, and power. And when the public learned that Daystar, a Christian television network that receives funding from ordinary Christians, had purchased one, they were not pleased. It was a thunderclap of news. Some believed that putting their final money in envelopes would aid God's work. However, same money could have been utilized for expensive leather seats, meal delivery, and petrol for traveling across the nation. The network initially attempted to defend the purchase. They claimed that it was a useful instrument for service and a crucial component of reaching people worldwide. Daystar actually had a wide span. They hosted conferences around the world, held fundraisers, and took pictures at mission areas. However, the pieces did not come together when investigative writer Julie Roy examined the jet's history. This decision was not a simple commercial decision. Instead of having a clear goal, it appeared to be something done to support a way of life. Julie discovered that missionary flights were not the only uses for the aircraft. It was utilized in private. For those at the top, it was a minor victory. Before long, someone posed a poor question. Was Daystar becoming a business instead of a church? People asked that question not only in quiet living rooms or on websites. It spread swiftly. There was anger among the crowd. Because they were impoverished, some gave. Some have been donating for a long time. They now questioned whether their sacrifices had contributed to the establishment of another person's empire. The jet, however, was only the first step. Julie discovered more unsettling items the deeper she dug. Daystar's status as a church had long been mandated by law. It was exempt from filing Form 990, a public financial statement required by most NGOs since it was not a tax-exempt organization. This essentially meant that nobody could see where the funds were being spent. The amount of money spent on speeches, events, salaries, and personal benefits could not be tracked. It was all in the past. A curtain. Alarms were triggered by that alone. To demonstrate their credibility, ministries that receive donations from the general public typically make their financial information available to the public. Daystar didn't have to, though. Furthermore, it didn't occur under Joni Lamb's leadership. The secret merely increased suspicion. Why conceal the records if you're doing everything correctly? Then came the politics. Despite Daystar's long-standing conservative stance, Julie's reports demonstrated the network's close ties to political organizations. Daystar broadcast programs that explicitly favored particular politicians during significant election cycles. Network hosts have occasionally appeared during election rallies. Instead of discussing their religious beliefs, political guests were allowed to spend time on the broadcast, promoting campaigns and objectives. The IRS has explicit guidelines about this. Organizations and churches are free to express their opinions on moral matters, but they risk losing their tax-exempt status if they openly endorse political candidates. Daystar, though, appeared to fearlessly walk and occasionally cross that boundary. It was difficult to distinguish between teaching and campaigning because of the network, and that was the final straw for a few spectators. Their contributions did not support political initiatives. They donated funds to support missions and humanitarian endeavors, pray, and spread the gospel. A sense of betrayal increased as more details emerged. Once regarded as the queen of Christian television, Joni Lamb was now a spokesperson for a network that resembled a corporation more than a place of worship. She has discussed religion, family, and right and evil for years. Now, however, her integrity was being questioned. She made poor financial choices and offered feeble justifications for the jet. She did not, however, explain why the plane had been kept a secret. All she said was that it was a tool of the government. She said that the network followed the rules, but she didn't offer to open the books. And when more individuals began to ask questions, Daystar remained silent. The response was prompt. Donors ceased to provide. Daystar's performances were removed from church programming. People who had donated to the network but now felt awful about it shared numerous experiences on social media. Eventually, the jet became more than just a plane. The day that Daystar lost focus on its objectives and the day that numerous former employees came out, they discussed the ways in which civilization has evolved throughout time. Daystar initially seemed like a calling. There was a lot of work completed, hours, shared prayers, and had the impression that they were creating something sacred. However, as the network's wealth increased, things started to shift. Funds and priorities shifted, and the primary priority shifted from evangelizing to image protection. Employees were able to see who was on the aircraft and who wasn't, who was given access, and who received raises. The gap between the bosses and the employees widened. Those who went by the name Daystar were rumored to have first-class accommodations, pricey clothing, and elegant meals. However, because to a lack of financial openness, the size could not be verified. Since there was no method to heal the wounds, they grew worse. Not everyone was only curious about what was happening. They believed they had a right to know since it was their money, their religion, and their trust. Participating in politics also caused pain. Daystar fans came from a wide range of backgrounds. Both conservatives and non-conservatives were present. However, they all believed they were backing a ministry rather than a campaign. The network's political messaging caused individuals to quarrel with one another where there had been harmony. Some viewers completely gave up. There were many who believed that Daystar had been transformed into a machine. Power is more important than God. For many, witnessing a significant change in someone they looked up to was one of the most difficult things. Joni Lamb had been a mark of strength, especially since Marcus's passing. She got the job done, kept the network functioning, and was a rock on stage. However, no one knew her true name anymore. Did she have command? Was she aware of what was happening with the funds? Worse, did she approve of it? Joni defended the network with a few words. According to her, the truth was being altered by the news. "The ministry is still doing good work," she remarked, but her silence was more forceful. No financial breakdown, apologies, ambiguous promises that everything would be all right, or acknowledgments of errors were there. Furthermore, it is no longer appropriate to tell people to believe without evidence. Julie Roy, however, refused to compromise. She continued to write notes, speak with sources, and provide information. Getting even wasn't the major goal of her efforts. It has to do with accountability. She had done something that no one else dared to do, regardless of how people felt about her. She revealed the truth by drawing back the curtain. Ultimately, it was about more than a jet or politics. It has to do with honesty and a network that was initially built on trust, but later turned covert. It dealt with contributors who believed they were supporting God's mission but discovered they were really funding luxury. It was about leaders who demanded transparency yet remained silent. The fact that even missions can fail if no one monitors the finances astonished a lot of people. There are still some affects to be felt. Daystar might choose to continue airing. Even though Joni is still on television, people no longer trust her. After that, it's challenging to get back on track. Because a promise, not simply a phrase, lies at the core of every ministry. A pledge to be truthful, trustworthy, and sincere with those who have faith in you. Everything changes when that commitment is breached. Joni Lamb was inaccessible for years. She did more than just assist launch Daystar. It cherished her. Millions of people viewed Joni as a trustworthy and loyal individual who persevered through hardships, maintained her smile despite suffering, and carried on her husband Marcus Lamb's legacy after his passing. She wasn't only a talker. She was revered by many as a spirit guide and an example of unflinching Christian steadfastness. She shared inspirational, courageous, and faith-based tales on her show, Joni Table Talk. She appeared above the troubles facing other religious leaders. He listened with understanding and spoke with conviction. But then things started to go wrong. Everyone's focus shifted to Joni when investigative reporter Julie Royce began investigating Daystar's finances. Beyond the network, there were other things. The woman in charge is the reason. Joni had always been seen as lovely, modest, and selfless. However, Julie's study revealed information to Joni that changed her perspective. They were accused of having connections to political campaigns, spending a lot of money on luxuries, and using donated funds in dubious ways. It wasn't as obvious as some had hoped, but Joni Lamb was the one behind it all, protecting the network and herself. Joni initially struggled to maintain her composure. She conducted a few brief interviews, spoke to her audience, and gave a few speeches. She discussed leaving a legacy, remaining faithful in the face of adversity, and God's grace. However, the charges were stronger than her responses. When questioned about it, she said that the provided private jet was required for ministry travel, but she never gave an explanation for why there hadn't been any transparency. Daystar considered her political efforts as part of the larger picture and didn't consider how it may impact the ministry's nonprofit status when asked about it. Additionally, her public image started to reveal cracks as the stress increased. The difference was what made it worse. For many years, Joni had been truthful about duty, ethics, and responsibility. Despite her forceful statements, it was difficult to overlook the discrepancies between her actions and words. After decades of observing her, people started to feel conflicted. They believed they were seeing Joni, but were they actually seeing the same Joni in whom they had placed their hopes, money, and trust? Her supporters initially banded together to support her. They said that the media was distorting the facts and that she was being unfairly singled out. This was merely a spiritual fight, they argued, but even they became concerned when Joni wasn't quite truthful. Why hadn't she gotten to the books? Why didn't she respond immediately? Why was this vagueness necessary? More former Daystar workers started to come forward behind the scenes. They discussed a control structure that prioritized boss loyalty over morality. Some claimed that despite their attempts to voice their concerns, they were silenced. Others claimed that their fear prevented them from speaking, fear of losing their jobs, or, worse, of being perceived as government foes. Joni's stillness grew worse as the cries increased in volume. Individuals were no longer merely let down. They were furious that their contributions could have covered a luxurious lifestyle. They were upset because they weren't given the truth when they were requested for extra money. The fact that someone they had trusted for years could disappoint them infuriated them. Joni's name had always been associated with strength and honesty. Her public appearances now seemed to be an attempt to mend the damage. She seemed like she did it all the time with her cool voice. Her grins were phony, and no matter how many passages she quoted or how many tears she wept, the public's misgivings grew stronger. On social media, things became heated. Many people responded angrily to posts that defended Joni. In Christian communities, hashtags that demanded accountability gained popularity. As they discussed how ridiculous Joni's previous teachings on truth and stewardship were, others started uploading old tapes of her table talk. Everyone was watching her every step. Every silence is interpreted as an indication of guilt. It wasn't just poor publicity. It was a religious matter. When Joni fell, many Christians felt as though they were witnessing a piece of their own faith crumble. Joni remained where she was despite everything. She didn't request a leave of absence or an internal investigation. Rather, she increased her efforts. Rather of responding to misconduct, she described it as an assault on the faith. She talked about having a difficult time and being persecuted. She failed to recognize the suffering of those who had previously assisted her, though. They donated what little they had because they were single mothers. When the prayer lines were summoned, those elderly women sobbed. The family that watched every night found it fascinating. It seemed as though Joni was abandoning them all when she declined to discuss the allegations in public. In many respects, Joni's reputation was unaffected by Julie Royce's charges. The way Joni responded to it caused things to fall apart. Her silence drowned out what she had to say. The notion that she was somehow above reproach was shattered by her defensiveness, which appeared out of touch, and her inability to fully open the books and confront the truth. Before becoming embroiled in one of the largest scandals in Christian news, Joni Lamb was adored for her powerful voice. Despite the fact that the network continued to air it, her character was permanently damaged. She went out in public because she trusted others, was modest, and had faith. But as the strain and attention became intense, that image slowly, horribly, and in front of many people crumbled. Several churches were rocked by the Daystar and Joni Lamb controversy. The entire neighborhood was rocked. Churches abruptly split in two across the nation. People were now sitting on opposing sides of a conflict that was getting worse after years of praying together. While some thought Joni was being unfairly singled out by the media, others felt deceived and wanted to know what had happened. It was worth more than 100,000 pennies or a private plane. We discussed faith, trust, and the results of leading in God's name. Without any restrictions, individuals discussed difficult topics in small groups and in church foyers. She has accomplished a great deal. Now why would she lie? Some individuals inquired. They had offered their time, money, and prayers, and some of them had said, "Doing good doesn't excuse hiding the truth." They had watched Daystar when they waited in hospitals, when they needed spiritual support, or when they were alone at night. For them, it was more than just a network. Family members participated. Now that family was shattered. Pastors found it difficult to carry out their duties. Others made an effort to be fair by asking everyone to pray for each other. Others raised their voices, condemning the lack of transparency and urging their organizations to reconsider the use of their funds. Entire churches were reconsidering whether they should support Daystar or remain neutral. There were contentious discussions over it in some regions of the world. Some have exits that are quiet. Occasionally, people quit the church as well as the network.